Hello, today I'm going to look at a design that comes from Delectable Mountains, or that's what I know the pattern to be. Here in fact is a cushion cover made from that design. The design itself basically comes from either squares or rectangles that get cut up into strips. You will find a little bit more about it in the book called Stitch for Seasons, this one, and it appears in the back of the book as you can see here. What I have done with the design is subtly alter it, so instead of getting mountains, you actually get a star. And what I'm going to show you is how to make this particular block. And the way we're going to make it is you will end up with two blocks. One that looks like this, that has the purple as the main component, and one that looks like this, that is the mirror image of it. You are going to need 4 squares of your background fabric, 8.5 inch squares. You're going to need 2 squares of one of the colours, 8.5 inches, 2 more 8.5 inch squares of the second colour. In addition, you will want 4 strips of 2 inches by approximately 8 inches long. Incidentally, I'm using batiks, and these batiks I got from Doughties. You'll find Doughties on doughties.com. Let's begin. You're going to take one of the 8.5 inches of your background fabric and one of the 8.5 inches of colour and put them right sides together. Corner to corner on the diagonal, draw a line. Now, it doesn't matter what you draw the line with. I'm just going to use a biro so you can see it on the film. So we're drawing a line corner to corner. When you've done that, you are going to sew on the sewing machine 1/4 inch either side of this drawn line. So you're going to sew all the way down here and back up there 1/4 inch either side. Having done that, if we shift to this one, and I did use thread that matched my fabric so you will have difficulty seeing the stitching, you're going to take the rotary cutting ruler, or if you must, a pair of scissors, but remember scissors aren't accurate, and simply cut down that drawn line. When you've done that, open the fabric out and you should end up with a square made of 2 half square triangles, one in colour, one in your background. And what I would like you to do then is to take the back seam and press it open and flat all the way along the entire line. When you've done this with one of the coloured squares in the background, i.e. the turquoise ones, you'll have 2 of them, you're going to do exactly the same thing with the 2 purple ones. So you should end up with a whole load of half square triangles joined together. So I've done all the stitching, pressed all the seams open and flat, and I'm just going to trim each of the blocks back to exactly 8 inches. There'll only be a fraction to trim off them. So taking a square, I've got the square on 8 inches in that corner, and I'm just going to trim that little tiny weeny bit off the other 2 corners. Having done that, and this is important, so concentrate. Taking the coloured half square triangle, I've got the seams on the right side, the seams side up. I'm going to cut 2 of them at one time. If you're going to do this individually, make sure you do exactly the same thing all the time. I cannot stress it enough. You've got to repeat the same thing, otherwise the design doesn't work. So I've chopped them into 8 inch squares. Taking the ruler, and I'm using the triangle, you are going to cut these squares into 2 inch strips. Okay, so there's the 2 inches cut up there. There's one 2 inch strip, and a second 2 inch strip, and a third 2 inch strip. And this will need to happen with all the squares, and make very certain you have them exactly the same. So in other words, I've got the coloured triangle on my right hand side, and I've got the wrong side, the seam side upwards. And you can either cut them individually or cut them 2 at a time. I don't think I'd be bold enough to cut them 4 at a time. I've cut everything up into the 2 inch strips and laid them all out in their little piles. Okay, I'm going to take the first one here, the turquoise one, and turn it the other way up, right side up, and then I'm going to take the second one of the purple one and turn that right side up. Then I'm going to return to the turquoise one and take one of those and put it right side up, And finally, I'm going to go to a purple one and take one of those and put it right side up. So I have 4 strips here, making technically, which is half a mountain. These are going to be joined together to make a block. And I would join those 2 together, line them up top and bottom, and stitch all the way down their 1/4 inch seam allowance, as I have done here. And then stitch these 2 together. Now, watch point, do make certain you sew the right side, because it's very easy to turn it over on the sewing machine and sew the other side. So make certain you sew the correct side. If necessary, put a pin in it. And with luck, you should end up with 2 sections, one that looks like that and one that looks like that. You're now going to join them together to make a rectangle, as I have here. When you've done one of them, repeat the same thing 4 more times. When you've done it 4 more times, you'll then end up with a load of pieces left, and we're going to then take the large purple one, the medium-sized turquoise one, the littler purple one, and the baby turquoise one. And you'll stitch those 4 together, making 4 more squares. So you'll end up with, or rectangles rather, you'll end up with 4 rectangles that look like that, and 4 rectangles that are the mirror image and look like that one. Done all the stitching now. I've got 4 blocks that look like that, and 4 blocks that resemble this one. Do make sure you press the seams open and flat. I think you get a better finished effects when you do that. But the problem is they're not square, so we can't put them together easily to make a square. This is where your 8 2-inch strips come in, and they need to be stitched down the side where the smallest section is, the little bit on the bottom here. Now, why is it 2 inches? The reason why it's 2 inches is this block measures from one side to the other 6.5 inches. That's really 6. Okay, some hard sums coming up now. The length of it is 8 inches. That's really 7.5. So if this is 6 and that is 7.5, in order to make this into a square, I need to take 6 from 7.5, which leaves 1.5. But of course you need to add your seam allowances on. So 1.5 becomes 2 inches wide, and the length of it, which of course is 7.5 plus seam allowances, is the 8. Now please don't just cut a strip and just lop it off. Do make sure you cut it the right size. So each of your 8 blocks is going to be extended by a 2-inch strip on the side where the smallest triangle is. I've now got squares by adding that 2-inch strip to the end, and you can arrange them. If you take one of them and put it out like that, then take the second one, give it a 1/4 turn going round clockwise, take a third one, and what I find is much easier to put it directly on top of the second one and give that a 1/4 turn going round clockwise, and finally take the last one and give that a 1/4 turn going round clockwise, and there is our Delectable Mountain Star, for want of a better word. When you come to join it together, I would suggest you join those 2 together and join these 2 together and then stitch straight across the centre. It'd be really nice if your points lined up in the middle, or the seams lined up in the middle. Just be a little careful with the junction we have here, because you are stitching a straight seam to a diagonal one. And it might be easier in some ways to sew it with this block on the top, because then you've got all the seams and you can check that you're keeping the seams open and flat as you sew along. So join those 2 together, join those 2 together, and when you've done that, with a bit of luck, you will end up with a block that looks exactly like this one. Repeat with the other one and you will end up with a block that looks like that. So there we are. That is the Delectable Mountain Star, for want of a better name. Right, I finished off the 2 that I was working on, and I've made another 2 and just pinned them together on my pin board at the back of me. And as you can see, it make a really nice quilt. Now, I used 8.5-inch squares, but you could make it smaller, as I have here, and use 6.5-inch squares. And because I've only got one colour, I needed 2 squares of background, 2 squares of colour. And this time, having done exactly the same technique that I've shown you already, once I had turned them into the half square triangles, I cut them into 4 1.5 inch strips and then made them up into their squares with the addition of another little piece down the side. So you can do this design in one colour, or why not make it much more attractive and try 2. But remember, you will get 2 blocks if you try 2 colours. So there you are. That's the Delectable Mountain. So she's stuttering over her words. Star.